What's the most creepiest thing you've seen that you weren't supposed to see? My mom's first husband's gay lover texted me on accident after I got my then stepdad's old phone number. I remember the text, it was, "I can't wait to taste your sweet butt again." I was 12. One morning I was woken up by someone using an angle grinder. I know it was my younger brother, he usually used that to cut stuff. Couple minutes later I heard a noise of liquid splashing only you hear in horror movies. I wasn't sure if it was a dream or not because I was half asleep. Seconds later my brother walked into my room holding his right hand with his other hand to not fall off his body, looked at me and told me to not let him die. I was in shock. I picked something, like a towel or I don't know what it was, and quickly put that around his arm and called 911, but I was so shocked I couldn't even talk for like a minute. I put myself together and told the operator what happened and waited for the ambulance. I don't know how long it took them to arrive, but all that time I sat there with my brother trying to keep him away. I watched how slowly the lights in his eyes faded. He passed out a few times. When the ambulance came I went out of the house to get some air while they did their stuff. First thing I saw was the angle grinder with the power cable cut off and a line of blood 2 meters long. There was no time for ambulance to get him to hospital fast enough, so they called a helicopter. My brother survived. He can move that arm and even carry stuff with it, but lost most of its dexterity, which sucks because he is right-handed. This happened 3 years ago. A few years ago I still lived in my parents' house. It was about 11 PM and our dog started barking viciously. The dog is only able to move around in the backyard, and normally he would bark at cats in the front yard, but something about his bark was different. So I walked to the window to see what was going on. I looked out and saw a man looking through the same window. We both froze and after a few seconds he ran off. A few weeks later when we came home after work, all our electronics and expensive stuff was gone. On my way home, I was looking at a busy street from the subway platform I was on and I saw this guy that everyone knew as a scammer in the neighborhood. He'd throw himself in front of cars for money, but that day he threw himself in front of a real nice car and it struck him real hard. He flew into the four-way intersection, clearly shocked by the pain, and his head got crushed under a truck passing by that didn't slow down in time. It looked like a watermelon exploding. It's crazy seeing a full-on human who has existed for decades just stop existing in a few seconds. When I was growing up, my mom and dad were shopping for a new house. We went to a new construction neighborhood to take a look. There was a model that my mom liked and the sales lady said there was one being built down the street. It was about 50% done, but we can't take a look to get an idea of the space. So we all hopped into the sales lady car and went to go look. We got in the house and she started to show us around. We went upstairs and in the second floor bedroom, there was a guy fully nude and furiously masturbating away. I am 100% sure he heard us coming as the house was empty and our voices were slightly echoing as we moved around. My mom screamed. The sales lady screamed. My dad said WTF. I was just hysterically laughing. The guy grabbed his clothing and just ran past us and out the house. I think the laughter was probably what made him run. Someone laughing at me naked would definitely hurt my feelings. It's creepy to me, but not all that creepy on the whole, but on 2 different occasions I've helped my dad with his iPad and found very specific types of pee in open windows because he doesn't feel the need to close them apparently. I feel this but with my boyfriend's extremely Catholic grandfather. He regularly has me or my boyfriend help him with technology, and the amount of times one of us have found gay pee in his tabs or saved in secret files on his computer while trying to fix things for him is more than I can count on one hand. I was 8 and watched my friend's dad beating the crap out of him from my treehouse. Looking back, it's no wonder he was the class clown. People loved him at school. I drove by a head-on collision accident and saw Jaw sitting on the dashboard of the car. I'll never forget seeing that. Walked in on my gym teacher with his dong out, in his office alone, in the 7th grade. Had to go to a co-worker's apartment to retrieve office equipment and files, because he had died suddenly of a heart attack the night before. When I got there he was still in his recliner. The funeral home hadn't picked him up yet. I was not a happy puppy that day. Yeah, I don't care what anyone says. Those files can wait. Many years ago, when the Ninja motorcycles were really getting popular, The guy I was dating wanted one really bad. It was all he would talk about for weeks. His dad was a cop and knew his son was too stupid to ever safely operate a bike like that and wanted to turn him off of his obsession with the bike, so he got a hold of some footage of a crash on a Ninja. It was a young man and woman. Both were wearing shorts, shirts, flip-flops, no helmets. They must have hit the wall at 100 miles per hour. The camera did a close-up of the Ninja logo on the piece of motorcycle laying in the street, then surveyed the scene. The guy's face had hit the wall and just smeared along it for about a foot. It looked like someone had taken silly putty with a face on it and stretched it out. Unreal. The girl's whole body was just broken and her head was nowhere. Arms and legs dangling and pointing the wrong directions. A lot less blood than I expected. As the cleanup crew was putting her body in the body bag, tucking broken and flailing limbs into it, one of them said to the other, "Guess physical therapy is out of the question." LMAO, that is dark humor. Not me, but my wife. Our first apartment was on the ground level with our windows looking out on a brick paved courtyard. She was at home in the living room, taking care of 2 toddlers, home daycare, when there was a loud sound from out in the courtyard and she felt a reverberation in our floor. She said it sounded like someone had dropped a heavy box from a height. She looked out the living room window to see what junk got tossed out a window or whatever. She couldn't really see anything, so she stepped out into the lobby and opened the door leading to the courtyard. That's when she saw the body of the man who had just jumped off the roof. Watched a gangland show, saw an interesting tattoo and the location that would identify someone as having been in a particular gang and served time. Thought nothing of it. Literally the next Monday, I'm offloading equipment for a job, and as I pass a piece of gear to one of the new freelancers, I see the exact tattoo in the exact place in the show. He sees me, recognize what it is, and for a very short, very chill moment we pause. Then I grab the next piece of gear and decide to stop watching gangland shows. My uncle was babysitting me when I was about 9, and so I went to work with him for the day. He was a landlord for some buildings in a city at the time and got complaints that an elderly woman hadn't been seen in a few days from the neighbors. She was on the ground floor and I think the door may have been locked from the inside with a chain or something, but he had me climb in through the window to open the front door for him. My naturally curious self crawled through the window, and instead of going straight for the front door, I followed an awful smell towards the bedroom and found this lady face up on the ground dead. The place was a mess, so I didn't immediately associate the bad smell with death, but I bolted to the front door and watched them take her away in the ambulance. I don't know any legal answers here and I never really talked about it. Weird day. I'm a sales rep and was looking for a meeting room in a rural hospital's pathology department and got lost. I started opening doors to find someone who could help me. When I opened one door, there was a primate of some sort, not human, that was suspended by its wrists that had all of its skin flayed off. Presumably it was a primate cadaver being used for anatomy lessons, but it scared the crap out of me. The skin was removed from the skull, but the eyeballs remained, so it appeared to be staring at me as I entered the room. Pathology departments in small town hospitals are creepy as heck. And 28 days later. When I was 15, me and a buddy were hiking along the Merced River to our fishing spot when we were stopped on the path by 3 guys with ball caps and bandanas covering their faces and holding shotguns. They told us to turn around and go back, which we did without question. Was very strange since we'd been down there dozens of times and had never seen them before or after this. Found out a few months after that there was a clampers rally happening on the property of a guy who lived down there and they were guards. I didn't see it so much as heard it. I was the first up of the morning at my dermatologist's office and was sitting in the corner out of view of the receptionist's desk. The doctor came up to her behind the counter and started reaming her out, cussing etc. about some situation I couldn't understand, but he was actually yelling and super nasty. Then not 10 seconds later, he opens the door and comes out doing a jig and whistling and all do-dee-doo-dee-doo or shucks good morning Miss Sanibel do-dee-doo-dee-doo, like he usually did. I had whiplash from the 180. I stopped seeing him because the transformation was seriously scary. I had this experience too, with my kindly, gentle, silver-haired family doctor. The receptionist went into his office to ask him a question about my file. The door was slightly ajar, so I heard everything the doctor snarled at her, cursing her stupidity and all that. A few seconds later I was called in for my consultation and he was back in smiling, benevolent grandpa mode again. Scary. As a kid I was walking through the woods when on holiday. I was only following the river up and down so I couldn't get lost. I saw a tarpaulin through the trees and thought I would go check it out. As I got close, someone I couldn't see said turn around and keep walking, which, unsurprisingly, I did, at a run. When walking back along the river the next day, the tarp was gone. Till that tarp is a short form of its real name. Driving a friend and his family to the airport. He is in a dock and I am not. We watch a trail of motorcyclists, who group of them out for a ride. Anyhow one of the guys goes up, hits the side of a truck and then cracks his head wide open, at highway acceleration speeds and goes end over end with no upper part of his skull. Two other motorcyclists stand there with sheet or something to block view. Hard to miss the reddish pink brain stain on the highway. Goddammit, people wear a helmet. My family is a big hunting family. We hunt mainly wild boar but pretty much any pest control that needs to be taken care of on our properties is done without batting an eyelid. Driving to my uncle's farm pretty late at night, we turn a corner and see a few men with rifles on their backs just off to the side of the road all standing around what looks like some kind of skinned pig or kangaroo. My dad starts yelling at us, don't look, but being the little crap that I am of course I stared out my window. I wasn't, and still am not, scared of blood and I had seen plenty of dying and dead animals before, so I was confused as to why my dad was so shaken. As we pass, the men all turn and look at us and the animal also turns to look at us. But it wasn't an animal. It was a man stripped and beaten to an inch of his life curled up on the ground. I remember looking at my dad from the back seat. He was gripping the wheel so tightly his elbows were locked and he was staring straight ahead. Dad called the cops once we got to the farm but they said they didn't find anything. I don't know if my dad knows I saw it too, but we've never driven that road in the dark again. This old lady in Lower Manhattan pushing a shopping cart full of cans and bottles stops in front of me and my friends and pulls down her pants and begins pooping on the sidewalk. WTF LOL. I was trying to find my BB gun my parents took away and found their death certificate from my beloved uncle who had died of cancer a decade earlier. The cause of death said cerebral laceration. That's how I found out he actually shot himself. Heartbreaking for a 15-year-old. Could be late stage cancer and wanted to end it but the law doesn't allow that. I do know someone that chose that path versus suffering. I was sitting in the backseat on a bus and saw a man jerk off to a woman who was sitting a few spots in front of him. It was real nasty. He jizzed in an empty cup and threw it away in the small trash can in the bus. I was a 14 at the time. My phone's photos synced up with my mom's and I had found stuff meant for my dad. I will never be the same. While working in a level 1 trauma center, calibrating medical x-ray equipment, I was in the emergency room, hearing noises, voices, normal stuff. Anyway, I heard this kid crying, screaming at the top of his lungs. Sound like pretty powerful lungs. I was guessing a high school age. Everyone was moving fast as they normally do, however they had looks on their faces of deep concern. When one of the techs I knew well had a moment, I asked, guessing a kid fell out of his treehouse. The tech shook his head and claimed, that's no kid in there. That's a full-grown man who was riding his motorcycle and came in, some assembly required. I couldn't resist. A 200-pound man at over 6 feet tall in black Harley-Davidson leather. He lost his arm above the elbow and one of his legs was twisted around completely backwards. A visual I will never get out of my head. That much blood. You can physically smell the iron in the air. That's what I get for looking. This is literally why I didn't go into medicine like my brother. I almost never see mangled bodies as an accountant. I came home unannounced when I was in college and walked in on my parents freaking. He was really going to town on her, such that they didn't even notice. I tiptoed back out. That's funny. I had the same thing happen to me, but it was on vacation when I was 13 and my brother was 15. We both had friends with us and we came back home in the afternoon to see my parents on the couch in our family room. Devastating, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the conversation my parents had with us after. Never was able to shake that tragic memory. I was at my friend's house and we were playing on her dad's computer. Somehow we ended up in the search history and he'd been to sites about bestiality. I was like 12 and I've never been the same. A drunk idiot got hit by a car right in front of me in the middle of the night in the middle of freaking nowhere. His condition was unstable. The trauma helicopter, with trauma team OFC, was needed. I was holding a sheet with another person so onlookers wouldn't see what was happening and well, it wasn't pretty at all. Ever heard ribs crack due to CPR? And his lung collapsed or it was filling with blood? Not sure. But the trauma doctor opened up his chest right in front of me. I do not have any medical background and well, I've seen things that night that I wasn't supposed to. But it gave me more appreciation seeing those professionals in action basically performing surgery right in front of me. I was rather impressed by how methodical they were and their cool-headedness. I was driving to a Jimmy Buffett concert in Pennsylvania back in 2007 with my brother and 2 friends. We were just driving along and saw a 4-door sedan in the right-hand lane about half a mile in front of us swerving. Figured maybe they were going to the concert and pre-gamed a little too much. Anyway, my brother decides to pull up on them and see what we can see. As we are approaching we see handfuls of papers being thrown out the passenger window. Confused, we speed up and are just about to pass them on the left. We see a couple in their 50s in the car. The husband, who is driving, is just throwing haymakers at his wife right to her face in the passenger seat as he's driving. Time feels like it stood still for a minute. We are driving alongside with me in the passenger seat, window rolled down, flailing my arms around and yelling trying to get the guy's attention. Remind you we are going 55 mph. Another car comes up behind us and we actually managed to block the dude in and slow him down. Meanwhile my friend in the backseat is on the phone with 911 trying to get a cop out there. Long story short, we end up slowing the car down to a slow crawl and cops show up within what seemed like a minute. Cops took our statements and arrested the dude. It was a pretty quiet ride the rest of the way to the concert. I have been asked many times on here what a haymaker is. Imagine winding up with your arm and hitting something or someone as hard as you can. In this case, trigger warning, the man was driving and holding onto the wheel with his left hand, taking his right fist across his body to the left, almost touching the driver's side window with his fist and swinging it across his body towards the passenger seat headrest from 9 to 3 on a clock. However, in a car you are mostly at the same height, and this poor lady's face was taking all the contact. I saw a lady moving big blue chemical barrels into a garage. There was at least 20 in there and she saw me and closed her garage. Drove by an hour later, garage open, all barrels gone. I worked at a nursing home for nuns. Sometimes they would have Alzheimer's but be physically okay. I walked in on 2 nuns getting it on. I apologized, closed the door, and never mentioned it to anyone. When I wrote my progress note I said, patient unavailable. To be fair, it was none of your business. A classmate of mine was sitting weirdly and covered his crotch with his coat. He's acting weird, so I asked him if he's okay, and it turned out that he was jerking during the math class. Not sure whether it's hilarious or creepy, a little bit of both maybe. His awkward smile is both disturbing and funny. Not see but here. I was studying at the university library next to a guy who was listening to what I assumed to be music. He left to go to the bathroom, and when he took off his headphones I could hear that he was listening, very loudly, to some sort of anime loli moan compilation. And here I am using rain sounds as noise cancellation. When I was little, me and my family lived over 20 kilometers from a city in the woods. We had a nanny stay with us when our parents were away. Once when only me, my sister, we were around 8 years old, and nanny were home while playing outside, we saw a bunch of people emerge from the forest nearby and walk slowly like zombies towards our house. They tried climbing the fence, but they were too out of it to accomplish such a task. The nanny called our mom and she drove home from the city and took us all to our grandparents. We later found out that there was some drug-infused party going on not too far from our home and 2 people died from overdosing, 1 from stab wounds there. To this day I feel super grateful that they were too tired or drugged out to get past our fence that day and police was able to apprehend the ones that stayed around long enough. As soon as I read 20 km from a city in the woods I already knew some fricked up crap is gonna go down LMAO. A few years ago the wife and I were searching for our first home. I was in the basement of one of the places that we were looking at and somehow noticed a light switch that seemed out of place. I was flicking the switch as my wife and agent came down the stairs. My agent noticed a bit of light coming from underneath the drywall framing the stairs. With a little further inspection I found a very tiny passage between the foundation wall and the backside of the stairs. Said passage opened up into an undisclosed renovation that was a sub-basement room that was completely rubberized with an industrial hose and shower head. Walls, ceilings and flooring was all rubber. It was 100% a secret murder room. My agent called the cops and 48 hours later the listing was removed and the home had police tape around it. I was working in an office at the bottom of an apartment building. I was out having a smoke between phone calls and I heard a noise from above and I looked up to see a middle-aged woman coming straight down. I put my back against the wall and just watched the impact as it made a sound I'll never forget. I walked up to her to see if there was anything I could do, but I knew right away by her color and pool of blood forming beneath her I couldn't, so I ran in and called 911. Police arrived and I filled a report, closed up the office and went home. The very next morning on my way to my other job I saw a person walking on the side of the highway. Maybe 10 minutes later I heard on the radio a pedestrian was struck on the same highway I was just on. So yeah, that was pretty weird. The sound was probably her head. I've been exactly in that situation and I know that sound. I found it amazing how unrecognizable a human body can become yet still be human. I worked at a hospital when I was younger. Food service, delivering food trays to the patients. I walked into one of the sick rooms unknowingly. There was a crazy lady sitting in a chair holding a bedpan full of feces. And let me tell you, when I say crazy, this woman had a look in her eye that I haven't ever seen and don't ever want to see again. She said, "If you don't get out of my dwelling, I'm gonna throw crap on you, little boy." I've never been so freaked out in my life. Needless to say I dropped the dang tray and ran out. I worked in inpatient psych care for about 10 years. It was very considerate of her to give you a warning. You usually don't get one. I was in a health occupations class in high school. We did rotations in different healthcare environments. The first day at the local hospital I was in with a patient when the person administering meds came in. She gave the patient an oral medication in a syringe. The patient aspirated it and the nurse just walked out, leaving me and another student in the room. I ran to get another nurse but the woman died as a result. They sent us back to school that day. I was a wreck. When I was in primary school I saw a strayed mama cat and her baby. My family had dogs since I was kid, so I learned to never approach when mama animal just had baby. I was observing mama licking baby's head at the distance while suddenly I heard crunching noises. I wasn't sure what was going on at first, then at one point I saw that the baby no longer had head. I was scared of cat for many years after that. If it makes you feel any better, that baby probably was too sick or feeble to have survived anyways and the mom put it out of its misery quickly. Often mother animals will eat their young that aren't going to survive. Okay, I don't talk about this, ever, but I'm just going to go ahead and say mine. My neighbor's suicide. I was only like 9 and it was, I've been told, death by shotgun to the face. I say I've been told because my mind has blocked most of it out. I can remember walking up the steps and opening the door and then nothing. The closest thing I can remember after that was my mom holding me and rocking back and forth. I can also remember the smell, not sure if it's the smell I smelled that day, but sometimes, when the memory of walking up those steps is brought to mind, I get a faint smell in my nose. It's almost like the smell of cut meat and blood and pine wood. I was put into therapy for a while after it, but I can't remember much of that besides playing games. In my late teens, my therapist tried to get me to remember what I blocked out. It didn't work and I decided that I couldn't remember for the simple fact that I wasn't supposed to see that. Which is why I never speak of it. Even my friends I grew up with don't know about it. I worked for defense lawyers and they represented a very high profile, prolific serial killer in our area. We once got a ton of boxes back from storage so they could look for something. I looked in a box labeled pictures and once I started looking I couldn't stop. I swear I didn't sleep for a week. This is so fricked up. Happened when I was around 6. We lived out in the middle of absolute nowhere with a town population of roughly 30 or several miles apart. My dad and I are out walking the gravel roads. I was wearing my Spider-Man costume which I wore all the time as a kid. We approached this old grown over road that is barely noticeable anymore and walked down it a bit. To my surprise there was an old abandoned house that looked straight out of a horror movie. We went inside where my dad notices several things being off. He then tells me we need to leave quickly, so we returned home. As it turned out, an escaped criminal had been living in that building for a while. My dad noticed things like fresh food and signs someone had been living there, so that's why we bolted. Once we got home I was rewarded a nice warm bowl of macaroni and cheese while my dad talked to the countless numbers of police officers. The mac and cheese was the best gift to give a young crime fighter. I guess you truly were a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man that caught a criminal. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.